Imagine a night when the veil between the living and the dead thins to a whisper, when firelight flickers against the cold breath of autumn, and shadows seem to move with a life of their own. Why does humanity, across centuries and continents, return to this same ritual, to masks, to lanterns, to the thrill of the dark? Why has this night, more than 2,000 years old, survived invasions, religious reforms, and the sweep of modernity, only to become one of the most recognized celebrations on Earth? Tonight, we embark on a journey through time. We will walk the misty hills of ancient Ireland, where the Celts marked Samhain with bonfires so tall they seemed to scrape the stars. We will move through Roman temples, medieval villages, Puritan colonies, and finally to the bustling neighborhoods of modern America, where children still walk under the October moon, carrying lanterns of carved pumpkins, reenacting something far older than they realize. According to legend, Samhain was never just a seasonal festival. It was the boundary between worlds. As the last crops were gathered and the livestock brought in, the Celts believed the spirits of their ancestors wandered close, seeking warmth and recognition. Fires were lit not only for protection but for guidance, as if the flames themselves could show the spirits the path. This moment, part harvest ritual, part spiritual communion, carried a gravity that was felt deeply by the people who lived so close to the earth, so dependent on its cycles. But why did such a ritual not vanish, as so many others did? Why, instead, did it transform, adapting to new religions, to new lands, to new centuries, until it emerged as the Halloween we know today? That is the mystery of cultural memory. Traditions do not disappear. They bend, they merge, they disguise themselves. Samhain became All Hallows Eve, and All Hallows Eve became Halloween, a modern celebration wrapped in ancient echoes. To understand this journey, we must first step back. Picture the Celtic world 2 millennia ago. A landscape of stone circles, dense forests, and hill forts. The Celts lived across what is now Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and parts of France. Their year was divided not by months as we know them, but by great seasonal thresholds. Samhain, falling at the end of October, marked not only the close of harvest, but the beginning of the dark half of the year. Winter was a time of uncertainty, of hunger, of silence, of survival. To cross into it without ceremony would have seemed unthinkable. It was not simply the fear of cold or scarcity. It was the belief that, during this hinge of the year, the cosmos itself grew unstable. According to tradition, the boundaries weakened, and otherworldly beings could slip through. Some were ancestors, welcomed with offerings of food and drink. Others were mischievous or dangerous, spirits, fae, or darker presences. To ward them off, people left treats outside their doors, disguising themselves in crude masks and animal skins if they dared to step into the night. In doing so, they hoped to confuse or appease whatever forces walked the land. Here we glimpsed the first seeds of what would later become costumes, trick-or-treating, even the jack-o'-lantern. These were not inventions of modern imagination, but echoes of survival strategies. You disguised yourself, so the spirits might mistake you for one of their own. You left offerings so that mischief might pass by your home. And at the heart of it all burned the fire, communal, blazing, symbolic of both protection and renewal. The Romans, when they expanded into Celtic lands, did not erase Samhain, but layered their own traditions upon it. Festivals of Pomona, the goddess of fruit and orchards, mingled with Celtic customs, bringing in the imagery of apples, which explains why even today, apples bobbing in water remain a playful relic of the season. Later, with the rise of Christianity, the Church reframed Samhain as All Hallows Eve, preceding All Saints' Day. Yet the old fires still burned, just under different names. And so a thread was preserved, not through force, but through adaptation, not in temples or scriptures, but in the hearts of villagers who told stories, who lit candles, who let their children dress as spirits for a single night in October. This is why Halloween matters. It is not merely candy and costumes. It is a palimpsest of human history, a layered parchment where each culture writes its verse, but never fully erases the lines beneath. The Samhain fires are still there, if you look closely enough, flickering inside every jack-o'-lantern. As we move deeper into this journey, we will uncover how myths became traditions, how symbols shifted meanings, and how this night survived conquest, migration, and modernization. For now, imagine yourself at the edge of an ancient Celtic hill. The fire crackles. The air is sharp with smoke and frost. The people around you whisper of spirits in the dark. And in that silence between the flames and the shadows, Halloween is born. To picture the birth of Halloween, you must first see the world that shaped it. Imagine the Celtic landscape more than 2,000 years ago. Vast rolling hills, dense oak forests, mist rising over marshland, and the silhouettes of stone circles against a pale autumn moon. The Celts spread across what is now Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and parts of northern France, lived close to the rhythms of nature. Theirs was a world without electric light, without the security of insulated homes, without the knowledge that winter would pass without famine. Survival was measured in harvests, and how well you prepared for the long months when the land would seem to sleep. Samhain was not simply a date. It was the pivot of the year, the threshold between abundance and scarcity, light and dark. Farmers herded their cattle into enclosures, stored grains in woven baskets, and prepared meats for preservation. Families gathered, not only for necessity but for ritual, to face the winter as one community. Fires blazed on hilltops, visible for miles, their light pushing back the fear of encroaching darkness. According to Celtic belief, these fires carried both practical and spiritual meaning, warmth for the body, but also protection for the soul. In this fragile balance, the natural and the supernatural blurred. The Celts believed the otherworld, a place both beautiful and perilous, grew closer during Samhain. Ancestors could return to their kin, stepping briefly into the mortal world. But other beings wandered too. Fairies, shapeshifters, restless spirits. Some came as blessings, others as threats. Families set places at the table for the dead, leaving portions of food and drink as offerings. Outside, they left small gifts at thresholds, hoping to appease anything else that roamed the night. Costumes, though crude, played their part even then. People draped themselves in animal hides, painted faces with ash or clay, and wore masks to confuse wandering spirits. By disguising themselves, they aimed to blend with the unseen and avoid mischief. This, in its most primitive form, was the seed of the tradition that would later become Halloween costumes. When the Roman Empire extended into Celtic lands, cultural blending was inevitable. The Romans brought with them their own harvest festivals, among them the celebration of Pomona, the goddess of fruit and orchards. Apples, sacred to Pomona, became linked to Samhain, and from this union emerged playful customs like apple bobbing, which still lingers today in children's games. This blending illustrates how traditions adapt rather than vanish. The Celts continued to light fires and honor their spirits, but now with Roman flavors added to their rituals. Centuries later, as Christianity spread through Europe, the Church sought to frame pagan customs within its own liturgical calendar. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III established November 1st as All Saints' Day, a time to honor Christian martyrs and saints. The night before, October 31st, became known as All Hallows Eve. The timing was no coincidence. By placing a Christian holy day directly after Samhain, the Church hoped to transform the older festival into a new religious observance. But belief is not so easily redirected. People still carried lanterns into the night, still told stories of spirits, still wore disguises to protect themselves. What emerged was not a replacement but a layering. All Hallows Eve became a Christian festival in name, but in practice it retained echoes of Samhain. In villages, prayers for the dead coexisted with bonfires and feasting. Children carried soul cakes from house to house, an early form of what would later evolve into trick-or-treating. And beneath it all, the same conviction endured, that this night was different, charged, permeable, when the world felt thinner and the mysteries of life and death seemed closer at hand. This layering of beliefs, Celtic, Roman, Christian, ensured the survival of Halloween's essence. Rather than being erased, it adapted, changing form with each generation but always retaining its core, a recognition of death, a celebration of harvest, and a fascination with the unseen. It is this resilience that explains why, 2 millennia later, we still gather on October nights, lighting lanterns against the dark, playing with masks and shadows. But even as the church rebranded the festival, the old fears and hopes continued. In medieval villages, people whispered about witches and restless souls. They carried charms, sprinkled salt, or left offerings at crossroads. The tradition of disguising oneself grew more elaborate. Cloaks, hoods, masks, all intended to trick spirits into passing by unnoticed. Over time, this became less about fear and more about festivity. Yet the ritual of becoming someone else, even for a single night, remained deeply rooted. Thus, Halloween emerged not from a single culture but from a fusion of many. Celtic Samhain gave it its bones, Roman Pomona gave it its fruit, and Christian All Hallows gave it its name. Together, they wove a tradition too strong to fade, one that traveled across centuries and continents, ready to reinvent itself again and again. And so, as we continue on this journey, we will trace how these rituals, once sacred acts of survival, began to shift into stories, legends, and eventually into the playful customs we know. The fires of Samhain may have dimmed, but their glow is still there, flickering in every candle set inside a carved pumpkin, reminding us of a world where light and darkness were not just metaphors, but matters of life and death. Before Halloween became a date on the calendar, before it took its place in church liturgy or in neighborhood streets, it lived in the voices of storytellers. Oral tradition was the vessel that carried Samhain forward. In Celtic society, memory was not written in ink, but recited in song, in verse, and in tale. Druids, the spiritual leaders, judges, and lore-keepers of the Celts, preserved the stories of gods and heroes, not by scrolls, but by careful repetition, passed from one generation to the next. Theirs was a culture where words held power, where to speak a myth aloud was to give it life. According to legend, Samhain was not only the closing of the harvest, but a liminal point in mythic time. Stories told of heroes encountering otherworldly beings on that night, doors opening to hidden lands, mortals stepping briefly into fairy realms. One such tale, preserved in Irish myth cycles, tells of great warriors meeting spectral enemies under a blood-red moon, their fates sealed in the strangeness of Samhain night. Another speaks of lovers reunited when the veil thinned, only for dawn to separate them again. These myths carried warnings, comforts, and mysteries, all tied to the belief that this one night stood apart from all others. But oral tradition is fragile. With each retelling, details shifted. A hero's name changed, a spirit's form blurred, a location moved from hilltop to forest glen. These changes were not errors, but adaptations, adjusting the tale to the needs of the listener. What endured was not the precise wording, but the essence. Samhain is a time when the ordinary dissolved, when unseen powers stirred. It is only later, when monks began recording Celtic myths, that fragments of these tales were preserved in writing. Texts such as the Liber Gabala Wren, the Book of Invasions, and the metrical Den Schenkas contain echoes of pre-Christian festivals, woven into the mythological history of Ireland. But by the time they were written down, Christian influence was already reshaping their meaning. Spirits once revered became cast as demons, sacred groves became sites of danger, and rituals for the dead were reframed as warnings against pagan superstition. The stories survived, but in altered form. Here lies one of the fascinating truths of Halloween's journey. Myths rarely disappear. They are reinterpreted. What was once a hero's encounter with Fae might be retold as a saint's confrontation with temptation. What was once an offering to ancestors might be reframed as a charitable gift to the poor. Yet beneath the altered language, the structure remained recognizable. The night of crossing, the thinning of boundaries, the need to protect oneself. These motifs endured. Even language itself carries traces of this evolution. The very word Samhain comes from Old Irish, meaning summer's end. It was not originally sinister but descriptive, the seasonal shift. Yet in oral stories, Samhain grew personified, almost like an entity, a threshold with will and weight. Later, as translations passed through Latin and then into English, the word carried with it the aura of strangeness, becoming associated not only with a season but with the uncanny. By the Middle Ages, All Hallows Eve and Samhain were intertwined in popular speech, their boundaries as blurred as the worlds they described. Consider also the role of memory in diaspora. As Celtic peoples migrated, whether voluntarily or under conquest, They carried their stories with them. A ritual once performed on a windswept Irish hill might be recalled in a village far away, simplified into a tale for children. A song once sung around a fire might become a folk rhyme. These fragments are what allowed Samhain's essence to survive centuries of change, compressed into traditions small enough to pass along, yet resonant enough to endure. One striking example is the persistence of the soul light. In some regions, people carried small lanterns carved from turnips, beets, or gourds, hollowed and lit from within to ward off spirits. These were not merely tools, but symbolic fires, miniatures of the great communal bonfires. Oral tradition linked them to stories of wandering souls, like the infamous Jack of the Lantern, a trickster condemned to roam the night, carrying a single ember inside a carved turnip. Such tales were whispered long before they were written, proof that story and ritual were inseparable. From these oral traditions came a worldview, that death and life intermingled, that ancestors remained close, and that ritual could shape fate. As centuries passed, the myths recorded in manuscripts became reference points for scholars and storytellers. But for the common people, the living tradition continued in fires, costumes, and games. Words shifted, meanings blurred, but the heartbeat of Samhain remained. And this is perhaps the most remarkable part of Halloween's survival. It was never the property of the elite. Unlike myths preserved in temples or royal courts, Samhain belonged to the people, to farmers, villagers, children around the fire. It endured because it was lived, not just told. It was a night when everyone, from chieftain to shepherd, participated in the same ritual, facing the dark, together with story and flame. By the time we reach the Middle Ages, these oral roots have already spread into new soil. Christian prayers for souls mingle with tales of wandering spirits. Children recite rhymes in exchange for food. Storytellers weave the old myths with new morals. What began as Celtic Samhain has now become something far more complex, a tapestry of voices, each retelling shaping the night in new ways. And so Halloween continues its journey, no longer only a firelit ritual of survival, but a tradition carried in story, song, and memory, reshaped by every tongue that spoke its name. Behind every festival lies a cast of characters, gods, spirits, ancestors, and symbols, who carry the weight of its meaning. Halloween is no different. To understand its endurance, we must look at the figures who walked through its myths, who haunted its fires, and who still, in altered form, wander our modern imaginations. In Celtic lore, Samhain was not ruled by a single deity, but the festival touched on many aspects of their mythic pantheon. One recurring figure was the Morrigan, a goddess of battle, fate, and sovereignty. She often appeared as a crow or raven, circling battlefields, foretelling death. On Samhain, when the veil between worlds thinned, the Morrigan was believed to be especially present, her cries echoing in the night as omens of what winter might bring. To the Celts, she embodied both fear and protection, terrifying in her power, but also a guardian of cycles and endings. Otherworldly beings, the Sea, or people of the mounds, also held sway. According to legend, these fairy-like entities lived beneath ancient hills and burial mounds, emerging on liminal nights like Samhain. They were neither wholly benevolent nor purely evil. They were capricious, rewarding respect but punishing arrogance. Offerings of milk, bread, or honey were left at doors and crossroads, gifts to appease them. To encounter the Sea without such respect could bring misfortune. Here, in these stories, we see the roots of both trick and treat. The festival was also bound to tales of gods of harvest and death. In some myth cycles, Crumcrutch, an old fertility deity, was associated with seasonal sacrifice and the turning of the year. Though later Christian scribes cast him in a sinister light, his presence in early lore points to the deep connection between harvest, life, and the acceptance of death. Samhain was not only about spirits, it was about surrendering the old to make way for the new. As centuries passed, new figures were woven into the fabric of this night. With Christianity spread, saints and martyrs became associated with All Hallows. The idea of honoring the dead shifted toward prayers for holy souls in purgatory. Villagers went door to door offering prayers for the departed in exchange for food, a a practice called souling. This introduced a different kind of figure, the pious wanderer, carrying the memory of lost loved ones rather than fearing restless spirits. Yet even here, the echo of Samhain lingered. The poor, masked and humble, knocking on doors for sustenance, mirrored the older belief of spirits demanding offerings. In medieval imagination, witches also began to hover around Halloween. Though not directly tied to Samhain, the association grew stronger in later folklore. Witches were seen as those who consorted with spirits, who harnessed liminal nights for their rituals. The image of the cauldron, bubbling mysterious, was a late echo of the communal pots used in harvest feasts. Cats, especially black ones, became their companions, symbols of independence, mystery, and feared misfortune. The archetype of the witch merged with older ideas of wise women, herbalists, and healers, transforming over centuries into one of the most iconic figures of Halloween. Even the humble trickster plays a role. Legends of wandering souls, like Stingy Jack, an Irish tale of a man who tricked the devil and was doomed to wander the earth with a lantern, gave rise to the jack-o'-lantern tradition. Jack became a mythic everyman, neither saint nor god, but a figure of cunning and consequence, carrying his ember through endless night. His story illustrates how folk tales personalize cosmic themes, turning vast spiritual ideas into the fate of a single, flawed human. These figures, gods of war and death, fairy hosts, saints, witches, tricksters, represent different layers of the same mystery. Each embodies humanity's attempt to make sense of the liminal, the space between life and death, between seasons, between certainty and fear. Together, they form a gallery of archetypes, not bound to one religion or culture, but evolving across them, always keeping Halloween alive in the imagination. What is striking is how consistent these archetypes remain, even in their transformations. The Morrigan's dark wings echo in the bats we associate with Halloween. The Owlsee's capricious visits echo in trick-or-treaters knocking on doors. Solar's praying for the dead echo in children reciting rhymes for candy. Stingy Jack's ember in a turnip echoes in every pumpkin glowing on a porch. The witch, crouched at her cauldron, echoes in modern costumes and stories, her image softened into fun, yet still carrying the weight of fear and fascination. Through these figures, Halloween became not just a festival but a stage, where masks allowed ordinary people to play roles larger than themselves. One night each year, the farmer could become a spirit, the child a trickster, the widow a wise woman. Archetypes stepped out of myth and into the village square, embodied by the living. This playfulness with identity is perhaps the most enduring element of Halloween, for it speaks to something deeply human, the desire to step beyond oneself, if only for a night. And so the characters of Samhain, Pomona, All Hallows, and folk tradition all survive, reshaped but never erased. They are the cast of Halloween's eternal drama, walking with us through the centuries, appearing in costumes, in stories, and in the faint thrill of being someone else under a mask. Picture the world of the Celts, 2,000 years ago. The harvest has ended. Fields lie bare, stalks cut close to the earth. The sun sinks earlier each day, the chills settling deeper into bone. Tonight is Samhain, the threshold of winter. Families gather around fires, their shadows dancing against stone walls. The air smells of smoke and damp earth. This is not just a night of feasting. It is a night when the world feels porous, fragile, alive with unseen movement. According to legend, it was on such a night that the boundaries between the living and the other world were tested. One tale, carried through Irish oral tradition, tells of a young warrior, a man torn between courage and fear, who chose to walk alone across the fields when the fires had burned low. His name has been lost to history, but his story lingers. As the villagers slept, he wandered toward a burial mound said to be a doorway to the Owlsea, the fairy folk who dwelled beneath the hills. He carried no torch, only a blade, and the faint glow of moonlight. When he reached the mound, the air shifted. The night grew too quiet, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. From the hill rose figures, neither living nor dead, neither monstrous nor fully human. They were cloaked in mist, their voices like wind through reeds. They asked him why he came. Was it to seek knowledge, to prove his strength, or to tempt fate? According to the tale, He stood trembling, but he did not turn away. Instead, he asked for a vision of his future. The Alci, amused by his bravery, granted it. They showed him a glimpse, a battlefield where he fought, victorious but broken, his blood staining the ground, ravens circling above. They told him this was his fate, sealed on Samhain night. He would be remembered, but only through death. The warrior returned to his village, silent, knowing what awaited him. Within a year, the story says, his vision came true. And so Samhain became not just a night of spirits, but of destiny, a time when choices echoed far beyond the moment. This legend was not unique. Stories across Celtic lands tell of similar encounters, mortals who stepped too close to the other world on Samhain and paid the price. Some were lured into fairy feasts, only to awaken centuries later. The world changed. Others received gifts, but with hidden curses. A golden cup that could never be emptied until it brought ruin. A promise of love, fulfilled for a night, but gone by dawn. Always the same pattern. The liminal night, the crossing of boundaries, the choice that could not be undone. Such stories were not told to frighten children into obedience. They were survival tales, woven with meaning. To walk out into Samhain night was to tempt forces beyond human control. To disrespect the unseen was to invite consequence. And yet, woven through these stories was also hope. Not every spirit was cruel. Some were ancestors, returning to guide and comfort. Some offered wisdom, if approached with humility. It was a night of danger, yes, but also of possibility. One of the most enduring customs born from this belief was the setting of extra places at the table. On Samhain night, families would leave food and drink out for wandering souls, welcoming them home. Imagine the intimacy of that act. Bread left by the hearth, a cup filled for someone long gone. For the living, it was a reminder that death was not the end, that bond stretched beyond the grave. But it also carried a warning. If you failed to show respect, the spirit might linger in anger, leaving your household cursed with misfortune. Bonfires, too, were bound to these stories. Communities gathered around towering flames, believing the fire's light guided spirits, both to their families and back to the other world when the night was done. People carried embers home from the communal fire, relighting their hearths to guard their homes through winter. Fire was both a shield and a signal, a human claim of warmth and life against the encroaching dark. Disguise played a role as well. Those who had reason to leave their homes after nightfall covered themselves in animal skins or masks of carved wood. The belief was simple: if spirits roamed freely, better to be mistaken for one of them than to stand out as a vulnerable human. In these disguises, villagers could pass through the night unnoticed, hidden from harm. It was a ritual of fear and cunning, and the direct ancestor of the costumes children wear today. This cinematic retelling of a single Samhain night shows us why the tradition endured. It was more than ceremony. It was story lived out in action. Fire lit as symbol and shield, food left as offering and hope, masks worn as protection and play. Each gesture carried meaning, and each meaning carried forward into the centuries. Over time, these stories would shift in tone. In Christian retellings, the Alci became demons or restless souls. The warrior's bravery became folly. The offerings became prayers. But the structure remained the same. A liminal night, a choice, a consequence. In this way, Halloween's essence was preserved, a cultural memory replayed every autumn. And so the first great narrative of Halloween is this: the night is a stage where humans meet the unseen. Sometimes with courage, sometimes with fear, sometimes with foolish pride, always with consequence. And though the names and costumes change, the pattern remains visible even now. In the thrill of a child walking through the dark in costume, in the glow of a pumpkin lantern at a doorstep, in the sense that October 31st still feels different from all other nights. As Samhain spread across centuries and borders, it did not remain a single story. Instead, it fractured into countless variations, each region shaping the night according to its own fears, its own needs, its own imagination. The essence remained, the thinning of boundaries, the honoring of the dead, but the costumes of the myth changed. To trace these shifts is to watch Halloween evolve like a river, branching and rejoining, carving new channels through culture. In Ireland, where the festival's roots ran deepest, Samhain remained closely tied to the land itself. Ancient sites like Tara and Tlactga were not only political centers, but sacred landscapes, believed to be portals where the otherworld touched the human realm. Fires kindled that were said to ignite all others, linking the people of Ireland in a web of flame and protection. Oral tales lingered longest here, where the Alsi remained ever-present, not demons, not angels, but something older, more ambiguous. To live in Ireland was to live with these beings, to treat them with respect, to leave offerings at certain trees and mounds long after Christianity had declared such custom superstition. In Scotland, the festival grew harsher, more tightly bound to omens and divination. Scottish traditions emphasized prophecy on Samhain night. Young women, it was said, could peer into mirrors or into wells to glimpse their future husbands. Nuts were placed in fires, their movements interpreted as signs of fidelity or betrayal in love. Here, the festival became not only about death but about destiny, a night when fate revealed its secrets. This fascination with foretelling would echo centuries later in the fortune-telling games played at Halloween parties, where apples and mirrors replaced sacred wells, but the intent remained the same: to peek beyond the ordinary into what lay ahead. In Wales, the spirits of the dead were seen less as wanderers and more as active presences among the living. Folklore told of processions of the departed moving through villages, invisible but palpable, their passing marked by sudden chills or flickering lights. To encounter them was a warning, a reminder that the dead did not rest far away, but moved alongside the living on this one night. Welsh tales leaned into the communal, the belief that Samhain was not about individuals bargaining with fate, but about the collective relationship between a village and its ancestors. When these traditions reached the continent, they mingled with local customs. In Brittany, in northern France, the night became a time to tend to graves, lighting candles to guide souls and protect the living. In Germany, farmers feared that wandering spirits might sour their milk or spoil their crops. Protective rituals, scattering ashes, carrying iron, became entwined with the night's observances. In each place, the logic was the same. Spirits were near, and humans must respond, either with hospitality or with defense. By the Middle Ages, Halloween had absorbed yet another layer. The Church's attempt to sanctify the night through All Hallows Eve was only partially successful. Yes, prayers were said for the dead. Yes, saints' relics were venerated. But beneath the surface, older customs persisted. People still disguised themselves, not only as saints but as spirits. They carried lanterns, carved not yet from pumpkins, but from turnips and beets, hollowed and lit to ward off the dark. They still moved from house to house, reciting verses in exchange for food. This practice, known as souling, kept alive the idea of reciprocity with the unseen. Give, and you will be safe. Refuse, and mischief may follow. In some regions, children played a direct role in keeping the dead appeased. They became symbolic stand-ins for wandering souls, their knocking on doors echoing the belief that the departed demanded offerings. This fusion of theology and folklore explains why the custom survived. It satisfied both the Church's emphasis on charity and the older belief in protecting oneself from spirits. In effect, it was a compromise, and one that laid the groundwork for modern trick-or-treating. Not all reinterpretations were benign. In medieval Europe, fear of witchcraft and heresy grew, and with it, suspicion of liminal nights like Halloween. What had once been playful disguises were reimagined as signs of dangerous dabbling. The same bonfires that once welcomed ancestors were now sometimes lit to ward off imagined covens. Yet even under suspicion, the customs persisted. It was impossible to stamp out the deep-rooted rhythm of the season. Regional differences also shaped how people imagined the dead. In parts of Spain and Italy, November 1st and 2nd merged into a broader festival of remembrance, blending All Saints and All Souls with local folklore. Families visited cemeteries, offering food and drink to loved ones, a practice that mirrors, though independently, the Celtic offerings at hearth and threshold. In Eastern Europe, similar customs existed, with families believing the souls of the dead returned to visit, and meals prepared with empty seats kept for them at the table. Though separated by geography and belief, The human instinct remained the same. On this night, we acknowledge those who came before. Through these regional variations, Halloween's shape became kaleidoscopic. No longer just Samhain, no longer just All Hallows, but a patchwork of traditions that carried forward the same heartbeat. The nearness of the dead, the uncertainty of the season, the need for ritual to hold fear at bay. What united them all was the sense that October's end was different, that this night demanded recognition, whether through fire, prayer, or play. The result was a festival layered with paradox. It was holy, yet playful, fearful, yet comforting, pagan in origin, yet sanctified by the Church, local in practice, yet universal in theme. And it is precisely this paradox that allowed Halloween to survive. No matter where it traveled, it could be reshaped to fit the local worldview, while still holding onto its essence. This adaptability ensured its endurance, a tradition too flexible to be erased, too meaningful to be forgotten. From here, Halloween would continue its journey, moving out of the medieval village and into the modern world. But already, by the late Middle Ages, it had become something recognizable. A night of masks, of lights in the dark, of children seeking gifts, of stories whispered about spirits. Its shape was forming, even if its final form, the Halloween of pumpkins and candy, was still centuries away. Every enduring tradition carries a symbolic language, a collection of images and signs that speak louder than words. Halloween is no exception. Its survival owes much to the vividness of its symbols: bats against the moon, owls in the dark, black cats darting across a threshold, candles glowing inside hollowed gourds. To decode these images is to understand how people once interpreted the mysteries of death, fate, and the unseen. Take fire, for example. At Samhain, bonfires were the centerpiece. They were not merely practical, though they warmed and illuminated. They were sacred. Fire symbolized purification, a way to cleanse both the land and the spirit before winter. Families carried home embers from a communal fire to relight their hearths, binding the household to the wider community. Fire was continuity, a thread of light in the encroaching dark. Even now, the flicker of a candle in a jack-o'-lantern carries an echo of those ancient flames, a reminder that light itself was once the strongest charm against fear. Animals, too, became potent signs. The raven and crow, sacred to the Morgan, were omens of death and change. Their black wings silhouetted against gray skies seemed to signal the closeness of the otherworld. Owls, with their night cries, were thought to guide souls, or to forewarn of one's own passing. Cats, especially black ones, absorbed layers of meaning. In Celtic lore, they were guardians of the otherworld. In medieval superstition, companions of witches. To see a cat on Halloween night was to glimpse something liminal, a creature both ordinary and mystical. Even livestock carried symbolic weight. Cattle driven through the smoke of Samhain fires were believed to be blessed and protected through winter. Sheep and pigs, slaughtered at the season, became offerings and feasts, their presence marking the line between scarcity and survival. The animals were more than food. They were tokens of the year's balance, of life given so life might continue. Numbers, too, shaped the festival. 3 was sacred in Celtic tradition, the triple goddess, the 3 realms of land, sea, and sky. Tales of Samhain often revolved around 3 tests, 3 nights, 3 encounters. Later, in Christian overlays, the trio of October 31st, All Hallows Eve, November 1st, All Saints, and November 2nd, All Souls, formed a new sacred triad, preserving the pattern of 3s beneath a different faith. To the human mind, numbers were never mere counts, but signals of cosmic order. Masks and disguises carried their own profound symbolism. At their root was fear, the belief that spirits roamed freely on Samhain night, and that to walk among them unprotected was dangerous. By disguising oneself in animal skins or carved masks, one became part of the unseen world, hidden in plain sight. Yet masks also offered liberation. For one night, roles could shift. The farmer could be a ghost. The servant could be a lord. Children could embody trickster spirits. This fluidity of identity was thrilling, even transformative, hinting at the freedom to step outside oneself. The mask was protection, but it was also play. The jack-o'-lantern, perhaps the most iconic symbol today, was originally carved from turnips or beets. Its origins lie in folklore, the tale of Stingy Jack, condemned to wander with only a carved turnip lantern lit by an ember from hell. But beyond the story, the lantern carried practical and symbolic force. It was a portable fire, a beacon against spirits, a signal of human defiance in the face of darkness. When Irish immigrants carried this tradition to America, the larger, softer pumpkin became its natural successor. Its orange glow, visible across fields and porches, turned an old symbol into something unmistakably new. Colors, too, became part of Halloween's palette. Orange, the color of fire, harvest, and autumn leaves, paired with black, the color of night, mystery, and death. Together, they captured the festival's balance, life's warmth beside the inevitability of endings. White, too, appeared often, the color of bones, of ghosts, of purity and absence. These colors carried a kind of unspoken ritual language, guiding decorations, clothing, and imagination long before they were standardized in modern celebration. Objects associated with divination held symbolic weight as well. Apples, linked to Pomona and woven into Samhain rituals, became tools for seeing the future. In Scotland, girls placed apple peels over their shoulders, hoping to see the initials of their future husbands. Nuts were cast into fire, their crackling watched for signs of loyalty or betrayal. These simple objects, fruit and nuts from the harvest, were transformed into messages from the unseen. To hold an apple on Halloween was to hold both sustenance and a question for fate. Symbols changed, of course, with time and interpretation. In Christian retellings, bonfires became prayers in flame, masks became playful disguises, and cats became signs of witchcraft. In modern culture, symbols softened further. The bat became decoration, the ghost a white sheet with cutout eyes, the witch a pointed hat and broom. Yet the power of the symbols endured. Even in cartoon form, they retain their resonance because they speak to primal truths. The fear of dark, the comfort of fire, the fascination with death, and what lies beyond. What makes Halloween so enduring is this symbolic richness. Every lantern, every mask, every knock at the door carries within it centuries of layered meaning. A child dressed as a ghost is echoing ancestors who disguised themselves to hide from spirits. A pumpkin glowing on a porch recalls fires lit to guide souls across the veil. A game of bobbing for apples echoes divinations whispered in ancient villages. Symbols make the past live in the present, turning each modern celebration into an unconscious reenactment of myth. And so, when we see Halloween today, we are not just seeing decorations. We are witnessing humanity's oldest instincts to honor, to protect, to play, to transform, written in the language of symbols, a language that has traveled 2,000 years, never losing its voice. Traditions endure because they evolve, and Halloween is perhaps the most vivid proof of that. What began as Samhain, a night of fire and spirits in the Celtic world, has traveled through centuries of change to become one of the most recognizable celebrations in the modern age. Today, its echoes appear everywhere, in the words we use, the holidays we keep, the films we watch, the games we play. To walk through a neighborhood on October 31st is to walk through layers of history disguised as festivity. Start with language. The very word Halloween is a linguistic survival. It derives from All Hallows Eve, the night before All Saints' Day. Over time, the phrase contracted, syllables worn down in the way living speech always reshapes itself. Yet hidden in that single word is the entire history of Christian adaptation layered over pagan ritual. To say Halloween is to speak unconsciously of saints, of souls, of a night once meant to sanctify what it could not erase. Even the term trick-or-treat carries echoes of older customs. In medieval Britain, souling was the practice of going door to door, offering prayers for the dead in exchange for food. Later, Scottish and Irish traditions called it guising, children in disguise reciting verses or songs for gifts. The modern phrase, first recorded in North America in the early 20th century, softens the old exchange into playful mischief. But beneath the candy and costumes, the structure remains the same: to give and receive, to honor the night with offerings, to acknowledge that something is owed to forces beyond ourselves. Holidays across the world still carry reflections of Samhain. In Mexico and much of Latin America, Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, shares the same conviction that the dead return to visit. Families build altars, light candles, and prepare food for their ancestors. In East Asia, festivals like the Chinese Ghost Festival or Japan's Obon carry similar themes of honoring spirits through offerings and light. Though independent in origin, these celebrations echo Halloween's central idea that the living and the dead are not separated absolutely, but connected through ritual, remembrance, and respect. In popular culture, Halloween has become a canvas for imagination. Writers, filmmakers, and artists have drawn on its symbols for centuries. Gothic literature, from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to Bram Stoker's Dracula, resonated with the themes of liminality and the supernatural that Halloween embodies. In the 20th century, horror cinema made Halloween its stage, from the flickering black and white shadows of Nosferatu to the slasher films that bear the holiday's name. Each work reinterprets the same old fascination, the thrill of danger when the ordinary dissolves into the uncanny. Halloween is also deeply embedded in children's culture. Cartoons, books, and school activities frame it as a night of play. Pumpkins carved in classrooms, costumes paraded in daylight, games borrowed from older divination rituals repackaged as fun. Apple bobbing, for example, once a serious act of fortune-telling, is now an innocent challenge. This transformation shows how myths soften but remain meaningful. The fear diminishes, but the ritual persists, recast in forms suitable for each generation. Modern entertainment continues to mine Halloween's imagery because it speaks so directly to universal themes. Ghosts and spirits explore mortality. Witches explore power and transformation. Pumpkins, bats, and cats explore the beauty of the night. Each image is adaptable, equally suited to play or to fear, to children's costumes or to cinema's darkest scripts. That duality, playful and profound, ensures that Halloween never goes stale. The echoes of Samhain even shape our modern rituals beyond October. The fascination with costumes and transformation appears in comic conventions, masquerade parties, and online avatars, all distant relatives of the ancient instinct to step outside one's identity. The jack-o'-lantern's glow finds kinship in the candles of birthday cakes and memorial vigils, both acts of light marking a moment of significance. To carve, to disguise, to light a flame, these gestures are part of a deeper cultural grammar that Halloween has kept alive. Economically, too, Halloween is extraordinary. In the United States alone, billions are spent each year on costumes, decorations, and candy. It is second only to Christmas in consumer celebration. Yet beneath the commercial surface, the ritual remains communal. Children knocking on doors, neighbors offering gifts, strangers sharing in a single night of festivity. All of it echoes the ancient need to bind community together at the edge of winter. The act of walking through dark streets, lanterns glowing, is not so different from villagers once circling fires on hilltops. It is the same instinct, dressed in new clothing. Perhaps most importantly, Halloween in the modern world has become a stage for imagination. For children, it is a night when fantasy becomes real, when they can embody witches, superheroes, or creatures from myth. For adults, it is a chance to step into another skin, to flirt with fear, to play with identity. This echoes precisely the symbolic role masks once played, protection against spirits transformed into liberation from the self. It is no coincidence that Halloween, more than any other holiday, inspires creativity in costume, decoration, and story. It taps directly into the human desire to play with the unknown. And so, the echoes of Halloween are everywhere, in language, in holidays across the globe, in the rhythms of entertainment and commerce. What began as a firelit ritual for survival has become a cultural mirror, reflecting our timeless fascination with death, mystery, and transformation. Each year we reenact it, whether we know its origins or not. And perhaps that is why it endures, because even without remembering Samhain by name, we still feel the pulse of what it meant. The night when the boundary thins, when masks are worn, when light is carried into darkness. For all its masks and lanterns, Halloween is more than decoration and play. It is a case study in how human beings confront the unknown. To examine it through science and scholarship is to see how myth functions as a mirror of the human mind, reflecting our fears, our hopes, and our need for meaning in the face of mortality. Anthropologists often describe Halloween and its ancestor, Samhain, as a liminal ritual. Liminality is the state of being between worlds, neither one thing nor the other. It is the threshold moment when ordinary rules dissolve. Anthropologist Victor Turner, who studied rites of passage, noted that liminal times allow people to step outside their usual roles and confront deeper truths. Samhain, and later Halloween, was precisely such a moment. For one night, the living could engage with the dead, the humble could wear the mask of a king, and the boundaries of society could be blurred. It was dangerous, but it was also liberating. From a psychological perspective, Halloween fulfills a profound function. It allows people to rehearse fear in safety. To dress as a ghost or a monster is to confront the symbols of death and danger, but within the protected frame of ritual. The thrill of walking through dark streets, of seeing a jack-o'-lantern flicker, of telling ghost stories around a fire, is not just entertainment. It is a way of practicing resilience. Children who wear costumes and shout into the night are, in effect, learning that the dark can be played with, that fear can be mastered. Adults, too, find catharsis in horror films and haunted houses, ways of staging terror in environments where the outcome is known, and the stakes are temporary. Sociologists see in Halloween a mechanism for community cohesion. In agrarian societies, festivals marked survival milestones. Harvest gathered, winter approaching. Rituals reaffirm bonds. Lighting fires together, exchanging food, wearing masks, or walking in procession all reinforced that no family stood alone against the uncertainty of winter. Even today, when trick-or-treaters knock on doors, the ritual binds neighborhoods. Strangers interact, gifts are exchanged, and a sense of shared participation is renewed. Behind the candy is an ancient truth. Community is the surest defense against fear. Historians observe how myths survive not because they are literally believed, but because they are adaptable. Samhain endured Roman conquest by absorbing Pomona's apples. It endured Christianization by merging into All Hallows Eve. It endured migration by taking root in America, where pumpkins replaced turnips and souling became trick-or-treat. Each adaptation preserved the essence while altering the form. This is what makes cultural memory so powerful. Traditions are not brittle, they bend, they disguise themselves, they adapt to new worlds without losing their core. Folklorists emphasize the role of storytelling. A myth like that of Stingy Jack may not be historically true, but encodes lessons. Greed has consequences, cleverness cannot outwit death, and even in wandering there is ritual light. Stories like these endure because they satisfy emotional needs. They are frameworks for thinking about universal human concerns, mortality, morality, mystery. Halloween survives because it provides a recurring stage for such stories to be retold, reinvented, and relived. From the scientific side, there are also explanations for why people perceive Halloween as uncanny. Cognitive psychology notes that humans are attuned to ambiguity, to things that are almost but not quite. Masks, shadows, flickering light, and costumes trigger this response. They are familiar enough to be recognized, but altered enough to be unsettling. This almostness excites the brain, stirring vigilance and curiosity. The very aesthetics of Halloween, masks, shadows, costumes, lanterns, exploit this cognitive bias, keeping the night thrilling no matter how many centuries pass. There's also the biological rhythm of the season. October in the Northern Hemisphere is marked by shorter days, longer nights, cooler air, and dying leaves. Humans are seasonal creatures. Our moods and rituals respond to light and dark. The timing of Halloween, at the threshold of winter, coincides with our evolutionary awareness of scarcity and vulnerability. To mark this transition with fire, disguise, and communal gathering is not arbitrary. It is a cultural response to the body's instinctive awareness of change. Critics sometimes dismiss Halloween as commercial or frivolous, but anthropology and psychology suggest otherwise. It is a survival of humanity's oldest rituals. To light a lantern in October is to echo the instinct to carry fire into the dark. To wear a mask is to echo the need to blur identity when danger is near. To feast is to affirm abundance before winter's austerity. The rituals endure because they serve deep psychological functions. They soothe, they strengthen, they connect. And here lies the paradox. Science can explain Halloween, but it cannot replace it. To say that masks reduce anxiety or that rituals strengthen community is true, but it is not the whole truth. The lived experience of the night, the flicker of the pumpkin, the rustle of costumes, the laughter in the dark, carries meaning that analysis alone cannot capture. Myth and science do not cancel each other. They illuminate each other. Halloween stands at their intersection, both explainable and mysterious, both rational and enchanting. It is this duality, rational understanding alongside mythic resonance, that explains Halloween's extraordinary endurance. People no longer believe in the Owl's Sea as their ancestors did, but they still dress as spirits. They no longer fear famine in the same way, but they still light lanterns. Rationality explains why the ritual is unnecessary, but the heart insists it still matters. Science and tradition coexist, because humans are creatures of both reason and imagination. And so, Halloween survives not as superstition, not as empty festivity, but as a cultural rhythm, a ritual reenacted because it meets both logical and emotional needs. We mark the dark, we play with fear, we honor memory, and we laugh. It is, perhaps, the most human of holidays, a night where science can explain much, but myth still reigns. Stand back and look at the journey we've taken. A thread stretching over 2,000 years, from the fires of Samhain to the glowing pumpkins of our porches, from whispered myths of spirits in the mist to children's laughter echoing through suburban streets. Halloween has shifted in costume, but never in essence. It has always been a night of crossing, between seasons, between life and death, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Why does it endure? Because it speaks to something permanent in us. The Celts saw Samhain as the moment when the world turned toward darkness, and they met it with fire and ritual. The Romans layered their fruit and harvest festivals upon it, adding sweetness to its gravity. Christianity reframed it as a vigil for saints and souls, a night of remembrance. In every age, people found in this night a way to reconcile with fear, to tame it, to play with it, to turn it into story and symbol rather than silence. The rituals may look different now, but their roots are still visible. When a child wears a mask and walks into the October dark, they echo villagers disguising themselves from spirits. When a pumpkin glows on a porch, it carries the light of ancient bonfires and turnip lanterns. When families share candy, it is not so far from soul cakes and offerings left for wandering ancestors. And when neighbors open their doors, we see the oldest lesson of all, that community endures only when we give to one another, especially at the threshold of uncertainty. Halloween also reminds us of the universality of myth. Cultures across the world, from Mexico's Day of the Dead to Japan's Obon, carry rituals where the living and the dead briefly touch. Different origins, different forms, but the same instinct, to acknowledge those who came before us, and to affirm that we are not alone in facing the unknown. Halloween belongs to this family of human traditions, each a mirror of how we seek meaning in the face of mortality. There is, too, the beauty of imagination. Halloween allows us to transform for a night. The mask is not just protection, it is freedom. Children become heroes or monsters. Adults step into roles they never inhabit by day, and everyone participates in a collective theater of the uncanny. This play is not trivial. It is how humans explore identity, how we try on other selves, how we express what we cannot in daily life. Halloween gives us permission to dream in disguise. From a distance, it may look like a holiday of candy and costumes, but underneath it is a rehearsal for life itself. To face the dark, to honor memory, to light the way with fire and laughter. The rituals are ancient because the needs are eternal. Fear of death, desire for community, love of story, hunger for transformation. These are not Celtic or Christian, American or European. They are human. And so, when October's end comes, and the air sharpens, and the leaves fall, Halloween calls us again. We do not need to believe in the Owl's Sea to feel the thrill of the night. We do not need to fear famine to find comfort in lantern light. We participate because the ritual still speaks. It still binds us to one another, to our past, and to the mystery that always lies just beyond what we can see. The 2,000-year journey of Halloween is not just a story of a holiday. It is the story of humanity's resilience, our ability to carry myths across time, to reshape them without losing their heart. It is proof that traditions are not fragile relics, but living rivers flowing through generations, adapting, surviving, always telling us something about who we are. So when you see a child in costume, or hear leaves crunch beneath small feet in the dark, remember the fires on the hills of Ireland, the songs sung for the dead, the masks worn against spirits. Remember that this night carries voices 2 millennia old, still speaking, still glowing. Halloween matters because it is more than fun. It is a reminder that we are creatures of story, of ritual, of community. That death is part of life. That imagination can turn fear into play. That even in the darkest night, we carry the light. And as the final flame burns in the jack-o'-lantern, as the masks are set aside, as candy wrappers scatter like fallen leaves, what remains is what has always remained. The enduring truth that every ending carries a beginning, every shadow carries light, and every October we are given one night to step into the unknown and return, together, laughing,